Good evening and welcome to this special meeting of the City of Albuquerque Civilian Police Oversight Agency Board. I am Chair Eric Olivas, Chair of the Board. It is Monday, May 10th, and I'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Present here tonight, we have with the Civilian Police Oversight Agency Board members Vice Chair Chantel Galloway, Member Tara Armijo Pruitt, we have member Dr. William Cass, member Doug Mitchell. I believe we also have member Eric Nixon here by phone. And we do have a newly appointed member, Pastor Gion. I'm sorry, Gion, can you remind me of your last name? You're on mute.
Ralph.
Ralph, okay, thank you. And I believe that tonight you'll be joining us as a non-voting member for observation of the meeting. But
Okay.
We're really happy to have you here and looking forward to having you fully participate at our next meeting. So welcome and great to have you here. Also here tonight we have CPOA and CPOAB legal counsel Tina Gooch. From CPOA we have Valerie Barela, Kelly Mensa with CPCs. We have Chris Sylvan with City Council, Lindsay Van Meter with City Legal, and we have also Elizabeth Martinez with DOJ. Don't think I'm forgetting anybody there, so welcome everyone. Excuse me, item number 2, the mission statement of the Civilian Police Oversight Agency Board is advancing constitutional policing and accountability for APD and the Albuquerque community. Item number 3, we do have an agenda that's been posted for this meeting. Members have had an opportunity to review that. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any debate or changes that need to be made here? Seeing none, Ms. Barela, could you please call the roll?
Sure. Member Armijo Pruitt? Yes. Member Galloway?
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass?
Yes.
Member Mitchell?
Yes.
Member Olivas?
Yes.
That vote passed 5-0.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That takes us to item number 4, public comment. We did have 2 public comments from Ms. Geraldine D'Amato. Those were distributed to the board in advance of tonight's meeting, and board members had an opportunity to review those. So thank you for submitting those. That takes us on to item number 5, review and approval of the minutes from the April 8th meeting. Those were distributed to board members prior to the meeting and 10 days after the April 8th meeting via a web link. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
So move.
We have a motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any debate or comment on that? Discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Barela, could you please call the roll?
Sure. Member Armijo Pruitt?
Yes.
Thank you. Member Galloway?
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass?
Yes.
Member Mitchell?
Yeah, I need to abstain. That's a meeting I missed.
Member Olivas?
Yes.
That motion passed 4-0 with 1 abstain.
And just a point of clarification for board members, there is no need to abstain from a vote on a motion if you are not present at the meeting. It's only if you have a conflict of interest perceived or realized otherwise. So just a friendly reminder there, we are required to vote on all motions that come before the board unless it meets those criteria.
Eric, how would I vote on something that I wasn't at? So I don't know what was said. I don't want to vote no. You know,
I understand the dilemma, and I guess I would refer you to our legal counsel for the rationale behind that.
Okay.
That takes us on to item number 6, discussion and possible action. We have 4 items on this section tonight. The first item is led by myself. This is item A, board member training responsibilities. This should be very brief. I only want to reiterate that there are 3 members on the board currently that are not within compliance of their training responsibilities as specified in the CASA and the ordinance. And I have reached out to those members individually and asked them to complete that training as soon as possible. If there are any issues with receiving that training or accessing that training, please reach out to myself and Director Harness as soon as possible. This was an issue that was raised in IMR 13 by the monitor as be an issue of concern. And I think that it's something we can address very expeditiously if those members can please act on that quickly. And when you have completed that training, just send an email to Director Harness and myself, and we'll be able to move on past this. I would say that we can certainly have a broader discussion on training, and maybe that's a part of our next item or a separate item at another meeting. But I think that at this current time, we just need to get ourselves in compliance with what is currently expected, and we can certainly have that discussion at another time in another place. So that's really all I've got for there. I'll follow up in the at the next meeting, the meeting next week, and again in June if necessary, but hopefully we can close the book on that. So I'll open this up to discussion. If anyone has anything that they want to say, I won't go through the full list, but if there are any comments, I'm looking for hands. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close this item off the agenda, and we'll go ahead and move on to item B, IMR 13 and IMR 13 CPOA board letter to the court. So to just go ahead and give some background on this briefly, this is an item that we normally take up at our meetings following the release of the monitor's report. We just saw last week the release of IMR 13, and we are now at the point in time where there will be a public hearing to discuss that report and formally for the court to formally receive the report. And it has been traditional practice of the board to draft a letter, typically highlighting several issues that the board feels are of note. And I think that that's important that we have that discussion tonight. That's why I put this on the agenda, in hopes that, given that this is a light load we have tonight relatively, this will give us some time to discuss some of the issues that were highlighted and move through this. So I did want to start off briefly just going through what I felt were some of the high notes or low notes of the IMR again, this is only per my reading, and I hope that other members had a chance to look through here, and we can open this up. But I wanted to set the stage here by just kind of going through a few things that I thought were of note. There was a comment on the board's use or the board's findings in and use of appeals, treating cases as an appeal versus recognizing new evidence. And I think that's something that we were given some technical guidance on in the IMR, but it's something we need to be aware of going forward. Our legal counsel's put together a nice set of guidelines for us on processing appeals, but I think it's also something that were noted. There was a mention here, and I won't go into this too much since Director Harness isn't here, but there was a mention of 50 unprocessed files being located at the CPOA, 50 unprocessed complaints, and a suggestion that weekly, monthly, and quarterly reports by the agency or within the agency may be something necessary to prevent issues like that occurring in the future. It was noted that 75% of the agency's cases were considered timely within ordinance and CBA timelines. There was a comment on potential need for data-based assessments of staffing at the agency. There are several mentions of those cases or those instances where timelines are not within the 90-day period specified in ordinance, and often those were referenced back to issues with staffing at the agency, not having the staff that it needs in place to adequately and expeditiously investigate complaints. There is some discussion of the use of administrative closure for complaints and the need to carefully use that terminology. Again, the investigator positions unfilled in the budget remain highlighted in several areas and problematic from the monitor's perspective, given the change that we know the city council, through the ordinance rewrite, changed the budget from a fixed percentage of the police department budget to a budget request. The data analyst position at the CPOA was highlighted as being highly successful and a good addition to the needs of the agency, leading to annual reports being submitted in a much more timely fashion and other data analysis being completed in-house and in a timely fashion. There is a mention of a need to standardize some of the disciplinary action reports between IA and CPOA. And the stipulation is that CPOA needs to adopt that report from adopt the model that IA uses. The CPCs were highlighted as a national model with high praise of the CPOA's adoption and oversight of CPCs. So kudos to the agency on that, I believe, from the monitoring team. And a couple more issues specific to the board. Last couple here. Testing for internal and external trainings was mentioned as being an issue that was problematic and not frequently met. I believe it was stated that only 2 of 6 board members submitted reports that met the criteria for testing of the monitor, and I think we've had that discussion. They also highlight the need for the board to request focused training based on needs that the board has. And they also highlight the issues with incomplete 6-month trainings. And the last issue I have on my list is appointments to the board is also noted. Obviously, we have 2 new members that will be coming on soon. So we're currently down only 1 member, but I think that obviously the monitor is aware of that, and as are we. So I think the goal here tonight is for us to lead a discussion here of what we would like to focus on, I think, in our letter to the court and in our process going forward. I think it's also something that we have to be highly aware of, the issues with use of force investigations, use of force timelines. That's really one of the largest and most problematic areas that's highlighted in the IMR, and certainly we know our own struggles with that process. So I think that's also a fair point of discussion. But with that being said, I would like to go ahead and open this up to discussion, and using our discussion format we've used previously, I'll go ahead and go around the table here. Member Armijo Pruitt.
Thank you for that synopsis. Excuse me. It's that mention of the 50 cases in the filing cabinet. This is the 3rd IMR that it's been mentioned in. And I have to assume that's because there's a concern that because it hasn't been a recurrent, they haven't found 50 files more than one time, right? So I have to assume that means they're highlighting the need for a process to be put in place to manage the cases and maintain timelines and sort of oversight of that process within the agency. So I thought it was surprising to me. It was surprising to me to see that mentioned, that specific thing mentioned a 3rd time. But everything else feels like, including what generated that, it all feels like things we knew were of issue. I don't really have anything else to add. Thank you.
And I do want to briefly issue a correction here to members present tonight. I believe we actually have Pastor Richard Johnson observing the meeting, and Member Nixon is absent. I mistakenly stated that he was present. Moving on here, next in our order, Member Galloway.
I think that I agree largely with what is being said in the IMR's report. And I think that there's no real surprises, but I did also want to highlight one thing just because it came up a little bit in our last CRC meeting, where the IMR team noted that the new process for auditing cases strikes the right balance for the workload of the board and the requirements of the ordinance. And there was a little bit of discussion in our last CRC meeting about disbanding kind of that particular process. And I cautioned against it then, and I'm going to do so again now, even though we're going to discuss this a little bit more in a few moments, I would imagine. I think that it's important to note that the process as developed may not be perfect just yet, and we may be in kind of a wonky growing pains period right now, but we should not do away with the idea of a case review committee in that regard. So just that. And then the thing about the training testing requirements of the board, I think we need to look at that a little bit deeper and determine whether or not that's really required of either the CASA or the ordinance for us to complete, or if it's just a preference of the IMR team that we complete those things. But if it's a preference, then we shouldn't be penalized if members choose not to engage that process. So.
And just a point of clarification, I think you meant the testing for training processes. You might have said
right, the training testing, yeah.
Right. And as we have this discussion, I just want to encourage members to think about sort of what your top, and we can do this any way we want, but in the past we've kind of highlighted our top 3, or we could go top 4 or 5 issues, but sort of what issues do we want to highlight and talk about and potentially request assistance or refute or whatever we want to do. But I think that we can, as we're discussing, maybe we can start thinking about that. Next up, we have member Dr. Cass.
Yeah, so I think that at this point, our focus needs to be turned toward oversight. And I think this was pointed out in the NACOL training that wasn't completed. But I think it's really important to get that sort of training in order to get an overview of what oversight is supposed to be. And I think then the focus has to be on the serious use of force cases, which are becoming more and more problematic because there's a big backlog, and we're having trouble getting information necessary for review from the Force Review Board. So while the Force Review Board got pretty glowing reports, or at least positive reports, in that they've come a long way in terms of creating a process for doing serious use of force case review, that hasn't trickled down to the police oversight agency and to the board. And there is a problem with us getting that information. I think that's something we need to highlight. But I think in addition to that, we need to refresh our own use of force training, which is now I think about 2 years old. And I think that's one of the things that is going to be more and more important as we review these cases that come out of the Force Review Board. So that's essentially what I think is should be our main priority for further training and for further focus by the board. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Cass. Next up, member Mitchell.
Yeah, I guess I would just kind of concur with what Dr. Cass said. It seems to me that the use of force issue is the prevailing issue, and it's going to need more attention. But in some regard, it seems like we're almost reactive to that, in that we can't force them to do the investigations quicker. I mean, we can react and we can suggest and we can, try to motivate them. It sounds like they're taking steps to do that. So, I would guess that would be, I think that's what the community wants from us in terms of oversight. I'm not so sure they really want us to spend time on a police car parked on a sidewalk or something like that. And I'm not minimizing citizens' complaints. I mean, I think those can be dealt with in another way, in a different venue. But so I guess that would be my thoughts in terms of responding.
So our order here, we'll go ahead and restart here with myself here as we continue the discussion. So, I think there's probably strong support for certainly this issue with serious use of force materials. That seems to be really one of our main concerns right now, given that we very likely will not be able to view any serious use of force cases in this coming meeting next week, because we still do not have any videos for the use of force cases that are not necessarily officer-involved shootings or that require additional materials at this time, but none of those links are currently working and they haven't been fixed. And then as far as the other use of force materials for cases that require full case files, I think that I think we'll have more information next week, hopefully, but I think that at this point, we're still in limbo with that as to how quickly that may proceed and what sort of materials and what sort of timelines we can expect. So I think that's a very fair and critical point, given that's a critical function. And I was thinking about this today as the external force review team comes online and other improvements to IA may occur, and the high praise the monitor gave to Force Review Board. The slowest link in that process right now may well be, assuming those other portions come into full effect, the slowest link at this point would be the Police Oversight Board, this board, because if we're not able to access that material, we're not able to do our review, which is, essentially one of the final steps in that process for moving those cases. So I certainly think that's a fair point to highlight to the court, the need to expand that material. And I think that the IMR viewing window here didn't quite capture where we are now, given the dates that this cuts off was essentially right before we ran into this hang up where the platform was changed and we started running into these issues. I also support what Dr. Cass was saying about the training issues. I almost wonder if this is sort of a point number 2. I think that it serves us to highlight the fact that we have requested additional training on diversity and inclusion, as they've highlighted that we should be requesting additional training, and that's something that we have done. And we'll be following up on that very likely at the next meeting next week. But in addition to that, I think Dr. Cass raises a fair point that we may also want to potentially commit ourselves to requesting additional training on use of force issues or better understanding that process. And we certainly need to flesh out what we want, and maybe a further discussion. But I think those training issues, and then as Member Galloway said, this issue with requiring testing or an essay, let's call it, for members to essentially prove understanding or prove, some may say, attendance at trainings. And I think that it's, in my opinion, it's probably dubious whether that requirement is stated in the CASA or in the ordinance that we are required to prove that type of use of training. And I think that's a fair discussion for us to have, that this is something that was sort of a goalpost that was changed without our consultation or knowledge. And it was really just a requirement that was imposed on us without any real discussion or understanding of where this is coming from. So I think those are some really important issues. And I think a third one for me really goes to this, potentially what our next discussion is about, being case review and the need to sort of refocus the board. I think as an all-volunteer board, we have a lot of responsibilities. Our plate is very full. It's overflowing really most of the time. And perhaps it also intertwines with the lack of appointments, the lack of staffing on the board itself. But with the amount of things that we're tasked with doing, it's sort of a situation where something's got to give. And, at this point, I think that some of us are contemplating that trade-off might be between serious use of force cases and agency complaint cases. And perhaps that's an issue we want to highlight, because depending on the outcome of our discussion on that, we may be in a situation where we require at the least technical assistance with that transition, or at the most potentially changes to the CASA or changes to the ordinance, depending on sort of where we go with that. That's just sort of my thinking there. But Member Armijo Pruitt.
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Member Galloway.
Yeah, the only other thing that came to mind, it was touched on as progress moving forward with the new board appointees during this IMR period. And there is, to my understanding from Director Harness, some discussion taking place that is going to, not that we have historically had a very active role in the process of bringing on new board members and filtering through candidates and whatnot. But we may be at a point, if they're going to change things up, where we might advocate for more participation. I think that it is unreasonable to expect it to be more of a priority for any of the other parties or stakeholders than it would be for us. And so advocating for us to have some sort of participation moving forward, if things are going to change, might serve us well in the future.
Member Dr. Cass.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to reiterate what I think is, one of the problems with the Force Review Board, or what the output from the Force Review Board is that we're supposed to receive the information that the Force Review Board is used to make their decision, or at least a substantial part of it. And I think just, getting that information and making, publicly reminding the Force Review Board and APD, that this is our point of contact, and it's a role that we have to play. And I think there's been either we are getting insufficient information, or in some cases we've actually gotten, an abundance of information which sort of hides the ball. So in both cases, it doesn't allow us to do a good review. And so, I think it's just, the question is, how do we keep pushing on this issue, and how do we raise the priority? I think we should raise the priority for ourselves. And I think, in an affirmative way. And at the same time, I think transmit that message to APD that we need to get more accurate information sooner, and more complete information, but not all the information that buries the message or hides the message in a case review. So I'll stop there, but I think it's important that we get that prioritized.
Member Mitchell.
I guess the only comment I would have is just a little bit more on the whole issue of training. It seems the monitor has some issues or some concerns around the training, but I'm wondering, and maybe this has happened and I'm unaware of it, and I know that the monitor has had issues around the getting people through the process and appointed to the board. Has the monitor spent any time trying to talk to people that have left the board to find out why they've left? Because I mean, it's one thing to say, well, you need more board members, or they need to do this training, without considering all the other workload that's involved with being on this board. I would just be interested to know if the monitor has ever done exit interviews with people that have left, to see why it's been hard to get people, one, appointed, and two, get them to stay on the board once they get appointed. So, I think it's one thing to say we need to have this, but it's another thing to understand the dynamics around why those vacancies are occurring. That's all I got.
So I actually want to loop in our legal counsel, Counselor Gooch here, just to kind of give us sort of historical background on what to reiterate what the board has typically done and how we've sort of typically responded to these reports and the hearings, so that we can kind of set the stage for where to go.
Thank you, Chair Olivas, Honorable Board. Generally and historically speaking, the agency and the board put together a joint letter submitted to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice ensures that they're timely filed and before the court for the upcoming hearing. I don't expect this will be any different. And so what I would recommend is that the board figure out what its top priorities are for the letter. The agency will have its priorities as well. And then depending on how the board would like to proceed, through its chair, through me, through Director Harness, we can put together a draft and we can have that for the next board meeting on the 20th. So that gives a nice amount of time for the board to review that, whatever it may be. I believe that they are due on either the 28th or the 26th, the Department of Justice. Let me just double check my calendar. They're due on the 26th of May. So you have time, but for this evening, I think what would be very helpful is if the board would tell the agency, myself, the chair, whatever those top items are, and then we can put together that draft letter for the board's review at the next meeting for final approval. With that, historically, the top issues have been the budget and the decoupling of the budget from APD. That's been a top issue for quite some time. Another top issue has been the unfilled board positions. And that item, as your chair has pointed out, is getting better as we speak. And that's wonderful. But I do think that there's systemic issues, as Member Mitchell has pointed out, and there's other issues that still should make this a top priority for the board. Because just because right now things are looking up doesn't mean that we're not going to get into the systemic process that ever since I've been your legal counsel has been there. So that is the summary of the history. That's where we're looking to go. And I'm happy to answer any other questions from anyone about that.
Any questions, board members? So I think that we're getting to a point here where, we may be in a situation where we can, we could make a motion to specify a certain priority or certain topics that perhaps we want to focus this letter on. I suppose we can also keep it a little more informal and sort of come to an understanding of those issues. And of course, we'll have another opportunity at the next meeting to review that letter and review the stance. So I think there's some different ways we can go here. Anyone have a preference or ideas as to how you'd like to order that list? And it sounds like the expectations is that it would be a joint letter. So I suppose that's those issues will have to be agreed upon between the parties, so that it's hopefully not too lengthy of a list, but I don't think we should let that deter us either. Yes, Vice Chair Galloway.
Okay, so from my notes, I think that the three things that we talked about, perhaps including in a letter, one that we kind of have been doing is a continuation of the budget concerns. And as Tina mentioned, decoupling that from the city's budget process and maybe go back to an appeal, perhaps to go back to the a percentage of APD's annual budget and get back to that. The second one that I think that we should continue with is the advocation of ourselves in the board appointment process, so that we're not left out of that. And then I think that it would be prudent for us to, as you mentioned, Chair Olivas, highlight the fact that we have requested specialized training for the board. And I think that member Dr. Cass's idea of participating in use of force training is an exceptional idea, given that the last time I went through it was before the use of force policies were updated. And we are going to have more and more of those cases coming before us. And so being really solid in what their expectations are is probably to our benefit. So I think highlighting those two things and then asking for the court maybe to aid us with the budget process and the appointment process for board members. And so I would make a motion, I guess, that we include those things in our letter to the court.
I'll second. So we have a motion and a second on the floor here for 3 items to be included in this letter, one being the budget and the percentage format of the budget, unfilled positions and systemic issues relating to those positions, if I can summarize that, being lack of board involvement and persistent unfilled. And the third being training requests issued and potential new training requests moving forward. Do we have any discussion on this? I would like to offer an amendment to add a 4th item dealing with access to serious use of force materials, not limited to, but including some of the issues Dr. Cass raised, being lack of access to FRB materials in whole or in part in a timely fashion. We have an amendment. Do we have a second?
Second.
Amendment and a second. So on the amendment, do we have any discussion? Motion to amend the list as a 4th. Seeing no further discussion. Ms. Barrela, could you please call the roll?
Member Armia Prit,
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Thank you. Member Dr. Cass,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
Okay, that amendment passed 5-0.
Thank you. So we now have on the table the amended motion with 4 items now: budget, unfilled positions, training and training requests, and serious use of force case review materials. Any further discussion or amendment to be offered to this? We have a couple hands here. I think Councillor Gooch was up first.
Thank you, Chair Levis. I also will note that you also have an opportunity in the letter to raise highlights and positive things, not just issues. And so to the extent that you feel that the board would like to raise anything about the CPC, CPOA, or any of the positive highlights, this is also an opportunity to do that in a public setting and forum where those that might not tune into your regular meetings might not otherwise hear about it. So I don't want to, by my summary, only focus on the negative. There is an opportunity for positive.
Member Galloway.
I was going to suggest actually that I fix my motion to include responsibility for drafting this to legal counsel and the chair.
Okay, so is that, I guess that's an amendment. I'll second.
An amendment.
Any discussion on that, delegating the initial writing process of this to legal counsel and the board chair? Seeing none, Ms. Barrera, could we please call the roll?
Member Armijo Pruitt,
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
The amendment passed 5-0.
So we now have the twice amended motion on the table here with 4 points and delegation of the task to draft this letter to myself and Council Gooch. Do we have any further discussion on this? I would like to, I think that it's important to highlight potentially, I see two important successes here that the monitor highlighted that I think we also see in our daily actions. One being the CPCs. I think that Kelly Mensa is doing an excellent job in helping the CPCs coordinate their work and assisting them with their needs. And I think that speaks highly to both him individually, but also to the agency, the director, and the CPCs themselves. The praise that they received is really quite outstanding. And I also think that the praise heaped on the agency for its data analyst and what that's done to agency timelines with regards to submitting annual reports and internal use of data in agency processes. I think that those deserve to be highlighted by the board, and I would assume the agency would also be happy to highlight those successes, and I think we have certainly confirmed those. So I would offer one further amendment to add those two positive notes on the data analysts and use of that position in drafting documents for the CPOA and the CPCs and their success integrating into the CPOA.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
Eric, would there be any value in indicating the progress that's been made in terms of filling the positions and getting the investigators hired? And it seems like the agency has moved forward in terms of, well, the city has allocated the resources and the agency has moved forward with getting the positions in place to better position them to move things along. And, I know that ties back to the whole budget issue. I don't know if that's something we would want to indicate that we're pleased about or not.
I certainly don't disagree with you there. I guess I'm wondering if we need to do a separate amendment here or if we can add that to the amendment. I think maybe we can consider that a friendly amendment here. Is that permissible? Yes, it looks like we're getting approval for that. So if my second doesn't disagree with that, I think we can add that third point, being that at least budgeting for those positions and the hiring process is proceeding well. Further discussion? Seeing none. Ms. Barrera, could you please call the roll?
Yes. Member Armijo Pruitt,
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes.
Member Olivas,
Yes.
and that amendment passed 5-0. Thank you.
So we're back to the now thrice amended motion. Any further discussion or amendments to this? Seeing none, I think we can ask for potentially a final roll call on this, please.
Member Armijo Pruitt,
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes.
Member Olivas,
Yes.
and that motion passed 5-0. Thank you.
I think that will go ahead and conclude item B, IMR 13 and IMR 13 CPOA board letter. We will very likely see this item on the agenda again at the meeting next week, where we'll be able to re-review this draft and make any final edits or corrections that we'd like to make. So thank you, everyone. Next item, we have Item C, the case review process, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Member Galloway on this item.
Thank you, Chair Olivas. I think that what we have learned in the case review audit for this first quarter of 2021 is that at this point, we are doubling up on the work that should be taking place. And so I am going to ask the board to approve a hiatus of the case review committee for Q2 2021 and revisit for Q3 2021. There's this next discussion topic may drive further decisions then, but for the time being, just to suspend that committee and the work of that committee for this second quarter 2021.
I believe you're making a motion on that, correct?
I did that,
Oh.
yeah. Sorry if that wasn't clear. Yes, that's a motion.
Any further discussion on this item to suspend the Q2 audit?
Excuse me, Eric, did we get a second?
I did.
Oh, okay.
Seeing no, yes, Member Armijo Pruitt.
So I guess I'm curious, what is like, so suspending for 1 quarter achieves what? Is it to make space for some other discussion to happen? Or, I mean, if it's redundant and not, like, why skip a quarter and not just disband? Or, I mean, like, personally, I see that it is redundant work. The case review is always pretty redundant work, but one thing I see as a value of case review is that there is an opportunity for discussion about processes that might not get discussed otherwise because, well, this one was, out of timeline, so it wasn't pursued, but you could still kind of look at those things potentially that might underlie, so they might have brought up questions, whereas that's not really appropriate in the general discussion in the board about, whether or not to approve a findings letter. So I do see some value to that process, but I'm just curious why just a hiatus, and what would change next quarter that might make it worth reinstating that is different than now?
So I think for what we experienced in the case review committee, we looked at all the exact same materials that the full board receives right now after the motion that was passed in January or December or something like that. So there's nothing new really to look at. Any board member who may have a concern about those things that you just mentioned could bring that up to the director, to the agency at any point. We shouldn't be uncovering anything like that with the case review committee doing an audit function, completing their audit function on a quarterly basis. As for what would change, there has been a lot of discussion over the last several months about what the board's role should be in reviewing civilian complaints. And I know that you're familiar with that, but my next thing is going to be to ask Tina to take a look at the costs on the ordinance and whether or not it is viable for the board to remove itself from the complaint review process as an ongoing measure, and then replace it simply with the audit function. I think that the agency would be more pleased with that. I think it would significantly cut our workload as a board and even as a committee. And I think that, to Director Harness's point, it is a little bit more prudent for the board not to be in the position of making an initial finding and then being the appeal body for a civilian complaint. And so for all of those reasons, I think that the direction that came out of committee for last quarter 2020 was that the legal counsel would look at that with the director, and to my understanding that hasn't taken place. And so now we need to formalize that, codify it a little bit more so that that does occur, and give counsel the opportunity to do that and the authority to do that. So that's kind of where we're at. Right now it's just in limbo. We could meet again, but there's really no point in tying up our time and the investigator's time and the director's time in doing that. And I don't think anything is going to change quickly enough. But I think that by Q3 it could.
Thank you. That helps me understand where we're going with this. Appreciate it.
And this is Chair Olivas here. I want to apologize for potentially overlooking that perhaps these two items should have been reversed. It may have made more sense to talk about item C after item D. So, switching them, I think might have made more sense now that I too understand sort of what the ask is here. So I think that makes more sense. But, from my perspective, I think that we are sort of reviewing the case at least twice in this case, because we're reviewing it as a board and we're receiving the full case file. And then we're essentially asking case review to do the same thing again of a smaller subset of cases that have already been essentially audited by the board as a whole. I think it's worth noting and preserving that process because it was praised, as Member Galloway stated, it was praised by the monitor as being an effective and useful process, and perhaps that's something that needs to be maintained. But I think we're at a point here where perhaps it needs to be one or the other, not both, for the purposes of duplicating effort and potentially just wasting time. So I do support this temporary hiatus here, which would only suspend the current quarter review and potentially set this up to happen again in Q3. Further comments? We got out of order here a little bit with our typical list, so we'll just go ahead and open it up to hands if there's other comments. Dr. Cass?
Yes, I support this notion or this motion, and I think that this is it's a good idea in the sense that we're now prioritizing the work of the board. It's kind of backing into the process, but I think it says that there are things that that are going to have higher priority, and this is a way to get to those things, which I think are the most important work of the board. And so I think we now will free up some time on the part of the board to look at the things such as the serious use of force, officer involved shooting cases, and policy, which again are things that I think we've never given this a full discussion in a way that that we sit down and sort of do a strategic plan. But I think this is one way to get at the same result. So I support the idea, and I think I think we're working in the right direction.
And just to be clear here, Member Galloway, I'll ask you to clarify a point here. This is to suspend the case audit through the case review committee, correct? Not the monthly case review that the board regularly does currently.
For now. I'd hate to jump that gun until we find out whether or not the board can remove itself from the case review process. I think that there are steps, and I think this is the first one and the easiest one to kind of just put a pin in it for a minute.
Okay, great. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. No further discussion. Ms. Barrera, could you please call the roll?
Member Armijo Pruitt,
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
That motion passed 5-0. Thank you.
So the Q2 case review audit through the case review committee will be suspended. Item D is also Member Galloway's item, request for legal services case review. Member Galloway.
Okay, this should be pretty easy because we've discussed it in the past. We just need to codify it. The board authorizes council to review the CASA oversight ordinance and board policies and procedures to provide an opinion no later than the regularly scheduled June 2021 board meeting as to whether or not the board may forego review of agency findings and individuals' civilian complaints received and investigated by the agency, and instead review agency findings and complaint cases only when A, an appeal is requested by the complainant, or B, performing an audit as currently prescribed in our board policies and procedures. That is the motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion on this item. Member Dr. Cass.
No, I support this. I think this is a natural progression for what we're trying to accomplish here, and I think it's a good idea. That's all.
Member Mitchell.
I absolutely support it. I think we need to focus on the higher priority matters.
Member Armijo Pruitt, or I'm sorry, actually it's myself next in the order. Yes, I definitely support this, and I look forward to getting council's assessment of what the legal implications of this could be. And I hope that we can take it one step further. And if there are issues that, make this difficult, I hope that the board will, in the future, pursue those issues to pursue higher callings here that I think we need to focus on. We have limited time, limited energy, and limited bodies on this board, and there's just something's got to give. So I fully support this. Member Armijo Pruitt, you're next.
Sorry, I couldn't get my thing to unmute. Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think we're good. I don't have anything else to add about it.
All right, that takes us full circle here. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Ms. Barela, could you please call the roll?
Yes. Member Armijo Pruitt,
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes,
Member Olivas.
Yes.
That motion passed 5-0. Thank you.
All right, that concludes item D. Council Gooch, if you need any further assistance or clarification on that, feel free to reach out to us and we can guide you on that. With that, that takes us to item 7 on the agenda. This is a meeting with council regarding pending litigation. This is going to be, I would like to make a motion to move into closed session and possible action in the closed session regarding pending litigation. These are matters subject to attorney-client privilege pertaining to threatened or pending litigation in which the public body is or may become a participant to NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1 H7, Miller versus City of Albuquerque et al. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none. Ms. Barela, could you please call the roll? Affirmative vote is to move into closed session.
Member Armijo Pruitt,
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
yes.
Member Olivas,
Yes.
and the motion to move into closed session passed 5-0. Thank you.
Welcome back. This is a meeting of the City of Albuquerque Civilian Police Oversight Agency Board. This is Chair Oliva speaking. We are moving out of closed session, meeting with council regarding pending litigation or personnel issues, closed discussion and possible action regarding pending litigation, matters subject to the attorney-client privilege pertaining to threatened or pending litigation in which the public body is or may become a participant pursuant to NMSA 1978 Section 10-15-1H7, Miller v. City of Albuquerque et al. Do we have a motion to move out of closed session?
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Seeing none. Ms. Barrera, could you please call the roll?
Member Armijo Pruitt,
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
Motion to reconvene 5-0. Thank you.
Member Galloway.
Chair Olivas, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that we delegate authority to yourself to proceed with defense of this lawsuit as you see appropriate.
We have a motion. Motion and a second. Member Armijo Pruitt seconded that. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, Ms. Barrera, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Member Armijo Pruitt,
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
That motion passed 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you. That moves us on to item 8, other business. Other business from board members. Seeing none, I do have a couple of brief items. We do have a Public Safety Committee meeting, City Council Public Safety Committee meeting tomorrow at 3 p.m. Just letting members know that that's happening. I actually plan on attending myself. If there are more than 3 members that plan to attend, please let myself and Ms. Barrera and Ms. Segala know. If you're planning to attend either way, please let them know. Other item, we do have a budget, the budget meeting, a committee of the whole will be on the, sorry, look here quickly. This will be on the 13th. So coming up this Thursday, there's a committee of the whole budget hearing. This was the hearing that was recommended by Director Harness for the board to consider advocating for the agency budget. That being said, I reached out to Mr. Sylvan with City Council, and that meeting is only accepting written comment. So I would encourage board members to submit written comment if you feel so inclined on behalf of the agency and the board supporting the budget or advocating for the budget. We certainly know that we have a need for policy analysts and other needs at the board, at the board and at the agency. Policy analyst is one that's highlighted in the IMR. And of course, we know the chronic investigator shortage and other issues such as that. So I hope you can take a few moments and write some comments to the city council. And I believe there will be another meeting coming up on that, perhaps the following week. Mr. Sylvan put it in an email, but I think that we'll be able to discuss that at the next meeting. So I'll touch base on that. And then there's also going to be the Amici meeting that'll be coming up. Tina, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you know when that is? The 27th?
Chair Levis, yeah, Honorable Board, yeah, it is set for May 27th at 3:30.
So just putting those dates down. And again, if we have a strong possibility of multiple members attending, just please give us a heads up so we can issue a possible notice of quorum. So that's all I have for other business. One more opportunity for that if there's anything else. Seeing none. Our next.
Eric, Chantel has her hand up. Member,
I'm
Go.
sorry, I didn't see.
Sorry, this is just a housekeeping thing, but I see the agenda from Chris Sylvan for tomorrow's meeting, but do we have a link for that? Valerie, do you know?
I did not receive one. I sent him an email about it after checking the council website, and he indicated that he would put my name in public comment, but I don't have a link. However, if I'll request one and I can send it your way as well.
Thank you.
Anything else? Sorry about that. Our next regularly scheduled meeting will be next week on Thursday, May 20th at 5 p.m. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none. Ms. Barela, could you please call the roll?
yes, Member Armio Pruitt,
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Dr. Cass,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes.
Member Olivas,
Yes.
and that motion passed 5-0. Thank you.
All right. This meeting is adjourned. See you all next week.